Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Funding Opportunities for Your Community in 2019, an overview of what's ahead, hosted by the Bureau of Justice Assistance. At this time, I am pleased to announce that we have with us today Kristen Mahoney, BJA's Deputy Director of Policy. She will be giving us a brief overview and welcome, as well as Tammy Brown and Andre Bethia, Policy Advisors with BJA, who will be presenting the content for today's webinar. At this time, I'm going to turn it over to Kristen. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mary Jo. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Kristen Mahoney, Deputy Director for Policy at the Bureau of Justice Assistance. On behalf of our Director, John Adler, I'd like to welcome you to our webinar this afternoon. I couldn't be prouder of the team for working together to put this together for you all. We have 1,000 people on this webinar, and we are pleased that you are all so interested in the funding opportunities that BJA has to offer the field this year. My teams work very hard to develop initiatives that are relevant to the problems that you are all facing, and we look forward to presenting them to you this afternoon to help you get prepared for the grant writing season. So I'm going to turn it over to Tammy and Andre and enjoy your webinar. Thank you all very much.
Good afternoon, this is Tammy Brown, and I am a Senior Policy Advisor with BJA, and I'm part of the law enforcement team, so I will be primarily responsible for providing you the overview and content of the law enforcement-related grants, and then I'll be handing it over to my colleague, Andre. But before we begin, I just want to give you just a summary of our agenda today, which really the intent and point of this webinar is to provide you an overview of OJP as well as BJA, explain to you the grants that are available, and then also go through our FY19 Department of Justice program plan that really outlines all of our priorities as well as grant fundings, and then we'll be opening up to questions and answers. And if for some reason we run out of time, you will be more than happy to provide email responses after the webinar if for some reason we're not able to answer all of them within the time frame we're allotted. This is a series that we are presenting. It's a BJA Grant Education series. So this is the very first webinar. Again, just giving you those overviews. We wanted to let you know what we had out there in hopes that you'd be interested in applying, which is our second webinar, and it's really just first steps on how to apply, and that'll include how you register, how you navigate grants.gov, what resources are available for applicants, and other funding and information about our Funding Resource Center. The third webinar really focuses on the federal funding process, so what new and seasoned applicants should consider, and that's really things that will be covered in that webinar include critical elements of a solicitation, what your application should include, tips for developing your budget, and then how the peer review process works. And then our series will be concluded with our webinar entitled Submitting Your Application and How You Avoid Common Mistakes. So that's really about how you utilize the application checklist, how applications are successfully submitted, how subawards can be incorporated into the application, and then also how to attach documents and some of the nuts and bolts to help you go through the process smoothly. So what is the Office of Justice Programs? We describe ourselves as the grant funding, training, research, and statistical avenue to the criminal justice community under the Department of Justice. JOP is only one of our 3 departments within the Office of Justice that supply grants. Our other partner offices include the Office of Violence Against Women, as well as the Office of Community-Oriented Policing, which we refer to as COPS. But within OJP, our bureaus and offices, in addition to BJA, include our Bureau of Justice Statistics, which is really our data arm, our National Institute for Justice, which we think of as our research office, and then we have our Office of Victims of Crimes, which provides resources for victims as well as other grant funding available through that office. And then the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention, and they actually provide grants specific for juvenile justice. So I did want to note that because we have an office specifically for juvenile justice related grant funding, a lot of times our office does not fund juvenile related initiatives. So I did want to just make you all aware of that as you consider what subject areas when you're looking through the grants and what kind of programming that you'd like to apply for us through. And then lastly, our Office of Sex Offender Sentencing, Monitoring, Apprehending, and Registering and Tracking, which we call our SMART office, which is really, making sure that all of your states are in compliance with the Adam Walsh Act so that you are able to access funding through our office, because that is a requirement that you all are in compliance. So our mission is really to provide leadership and services in a grant administration and criminal justice policy development to support you all, which is the local and state and tribal justice agencies and communities. And our guiding principles include reducing crime, recidivism, unnecessary confinement, and also promoting safe and fair criminal justice system. But I also really wanted to highlight to you the priorities of this particular administration as you consider what types of programs and projects you propose through our solicitations and grant opportunities. So there's really been a strong emphasis on focusing on violent crime, and that includes drug and gun cases, as well as a priority in officer safety. So we have two types of grants through the Bureau of Justice Assistance. The first is discretionary. So discretionary grants are awarded directly by OJP to the eligible recipients, so directly from us out to the field, which means you would apply directly through us. And then we have what we consider formula-based grants. The formula-based grants are usually administered and managed by your state administering agencies. And if you're not familiar with who your state administering agency is, I would encourage you to learn that information. We're going to go ahead and put in the chat function a link that you'll be able to click on the map of where your particular state is, and you should get that information. But the reason that that's so important is because the federal funding through the formula, which is really based upon your crime rate and your population, goes to these individuals, and then they usually put it out to your state, similar to how we do at the federal level, but to your state agencies and the organization, within your states to apply through them, and they prioritize it usually something that is connected to the priorities of either your governor or your particular state and your strategic criminal plan. But a lot of times when they have additional funding at the end of the fiscal year, they may be looking for opportunities to supply that funding for one-time cost. So it could be overtime for a police department, it could be a warrant initiative, things that they could expend that money down so it doesn't revert back to us, which we appreciate because the whole intent of that funding is to get it to you all in the field and to be able to support you. So the main formula of funding that is provided is through our Edward Byrne Memorial Justice Assistance Grant. We call it our JAG Grant. And it's really our flagship program and the leading source of our federal justice funding to state, local, and tribal jurisdictions. So the types of things that can be funded through JAG include law enforcement, prosecution and court-related initiatives, crime prevention and education, corrections, parole and probation, drug treatment and enforcement, planning, evaluation, and technology improvements, as well as crime victim and witness programs. So this fiscal year, we are anticipating awarding up to 56 of these grants, and we're estimating them to be an average of up to $3 million. And these should be released in our third quarter, which is April, May, and June. And I do want to preface that while we're presenting this information and this is what we have to date, it is subject to change, and I think you'll notice as I go through some of these slides, even the application and, submissions of when we're going to get these out on the streets may be just a little bit delayed based on the government shutdown, but the ones that are listed as that should have been released in the first quarter are the ones that you should be looking for first, and then obviously second quarter and then third quarter. The next grant solicitation that I want to talk about is the Project Safe Neighborhoods, and this is another formula-based award that goes to, it's based on your U.S. attorneys in each district. The money doesn't go to them, but the U.S. attorney determines who is the physical agent that can receive the money, and it's really geared upon trying to focus on a reduction in crime associated with gangs and guns. But it's also a very team-related coordination grant of local, state, and federal agencies coming together with a unified approach led by the U.S. Attorney. And its design features include leadership, partnership, targeted and prioritized enforcement, prevention, as well as accountability. So again, we estimate we'll have up to about 93 awards with the average amount of $350,000, and the application submission deadline will be 30 to 60 days after the release date. So that's the time frame in which you'll have to apply. And again, the amount of the awards are determined by your crime problem as well as the population within the jurisdiction. So the next solicitation is our Crime Gun Intelligence Centers, and I don't know how familiar you all are on the call with Crime Gun Intelligence Centers. This is one of our competitive grants that is discretionary, and the intent of it is really to support local law enforcement to develop a business model to utilize technology that the ATF has created to do ballistic imaging of shell casings. So if an officer is on the street and collects a shell casing from a shooting or a scene, they're able to put it into the technology and determine if it matches the database that they have created and if that particular gun has been used in that shooting. So they can, in essence, link the gun using the casings through the database and determine when a gun has been used in a number of different crime scenes. So we anticipate 5 awards for the CJAG grant, and they average up to $800,000, and we're hoping that this will be released in the next, if not the end of this month, in February or March. And the next diagram really just gives you the workflow of how a crime intelligence center works. So again, it's that officer getting out of their car, picking up the casings, putting it into what we call the NIBIN machine, which is the technology, and then if they've collected a gun, doing gun tracing, having the ATF CJIC be the one to provide the intel and analysis if and when they do have a hit, and then providing it back to those detectives for investigation, which ultimately we would hope would result in arrest, and then determining whether the charge can be made through the state DA or through the federal prosecutors, and then lastly just providing feedback to that initial officer that collected that casing to incentivize them and understand that by virtue of them doing that, they were successful in apprehending and hopefully convicting an individual. All right. The next solicitation is our Sexual Assault Kit Initiative, and we call it SACI, and this is really to support the field in inventory testing and tracking sexual assault kits, particularly when you have a backlog. We anticipate this year awarding 28 of those awards, with the average amount up to $1,250,000. And again, this is one that you should look for in the very near future, and we hope to have released, if not the end of this month, early February. Okay. Strategies for Police Innovation. So this is one of our grants. It was formerly known as Smart Policing, and we anticipate jurisdictions receiving an average of about $650,000. Typically, they can also be $700 for about a 3-year initiative, but this is really an opportunity for law enforcement and police departments to be very creative in coming up with operational or other innovative projects that will help the department in targeting violent crime. And what's unique about this particular grant solicitation is also that we strongly encourage a researcher to evaluate the project and have that be written in as part of the grant, just so that as you all in the field are operationalizing different projects and initiatives, we can show and demonstrate that they've worked and hopefully have them modeled in other jurisdictions throughout the United States. Then we have body-worn cameras. So body-worn cameras is exactly what it sounds like. I know a lot of jurisdictions have already implemented body-worn cameras within their departments, but this is also an opportunity. You could use this grant funding for an expansion, or if there's any additional cameras that are needed, any cameras that have previously broken and need to be replaced. And there are 4 different categories, and the categories within the solicitation are really based upon the size of your department. So for small to mid-size agencies, so that would be sworn officers of 250 or less, can receive up to $500,000 in federal funding. For larger agencies, which would be over 250, up to 1,000 sworn officers, you could receive $2 million in this category. The third is for extra large agencies, which is agencies that have more than 1,000 sworn officers, and you'd be eligible for $3 million. And then again, we have in our expansion category that allows you to apply for additional cameras even if you have received this grant in the past. So this year we estimate up to 71 awards, and again, after it's released, the deadline is 30 to 60 days, but that will be specified within the solicitation for this grant. Enhanced Collaborative Model for Task Force to Combat Human Trafficking. This was a former grant that was through our Office of Victim Services, and it really has 2 prongs. It can be developing training for law enforcement and communities to identify, tracking, and rescue victims by working with federal law enforcement as well as victim service providers. And it also can be used to support task forces that should be based on strategy with collaboration with state, local, and human service, victim service providers, as well as law enforcement and the U.S. Attorney's Office. So when you're looking at this grant, I would just encourage you to look at those collaborations and work with your partners in applying for this. We estimate these awards to make up to 10 awards, with the average amount being up to $900,000, and this should be one that's released in our second quarter, so probably February, March, or April at this stage. Our Intellectual Property Enforcement Program is designed to provide national support to improve capacity of state, local, and tribal criminal justice systems just to address IP enforcement, and that could include prosecution, prevention training, as well as technical assistance. A lot of departments in the past have utilized this grant to do this work with overtime. So we anticipate up to 6 awards in the amount of up to $400,000 to be released in our second quarter. Our National Officer Safety Initiative program is really exactly what it sounds like. It's just to provide key areas based on existing needs and emerging trends and concerns to ensure the safety of officers within your departments. So we estimate up to 15 awards, up to $1 million that will be released again in the second quarter. This is a new initiative that we are putting out to the field this fiscal year. We call it our STOP grant. It's Students, Teachers, and Officers Preventing School Violence. And this can be utilized primarily for either an assessment of your existing schools and your readiness to address these issues, as well as any kind of technology that may be able to provide you with safety within your schools for improvements. So we're really seeking applicants to address the development and operation to make sure that the schools within your jurisdictions remain safe and are ready to address any threats. So we estimate these awards to make up to 65 at up to $500,000 to be released in our second quarter. And along with, we have a separate grant that is similar, but this particular grant is specific to respond to mental health crisis programs. And this is really in compliance with the Stop School Violence Act of 2018. So we estimate that we will award up to 70 awards under this solicitation, up to $1 million per award to be released in the second quarter. Our innovations in community-based crime reduction is focused on high crime communities, really looking at those hot spots, but looking for departments to do community-based policing and assist the community with struggles around drug abuse, and integrate law enforcement and enforcement strategies using community-based reduction efforts. So this award we intend to issue 10 at up to $1 million, again at the second quarter. And the last law enforcement related initiative that I'm going to talk about before I hand it over to my colleague Andre is our innovative prosecution solutions for combating violent crime. This is very comparable to our innovations for policing solutions, but it is an opportunity specifically for prosecutors to come up with and be able to fund innovative projects that help address violent crime for prosecutors' offices. So this could be anything from a crime strategies unit to developing risk assessments to diverting individuals in order to help prioritize and focus on violent offenders. And we anticipate that awarding 6 of these in the amount up to $360,000. And again, this will be released in the second quarter. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Andre, and he's going to cover the remaining solicitation and grant opportunities within BJA for this fiscal year.
Thank you, Tammy. And hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us here at the Bureau of Justice Assistance. My name is Andre Basia, and I'm a policy advisor here at BJA. I'm going to continue in the realm of looking at some of the solicitations that are geared towards systems improvement, whether in terms of corrections or thinking about wrongful conviction, or even some of our more tribal coordinated efforts. So first and foremost, we have listed on the screen the Prison Rape Elimination Act program. This is a demonstration project to establish zero-tolerance cultures for sexual assault and correctional facilities. In fiscal year 2019, we estimate up to 20 awards at an average amount of $300,000 each. So far, we expect the release of the solicitation to occur in Q2, which would be January, February, or March. Knowing that we're ending at the end of January and on our way to February, we're definitely going to have this released to the field for those correctional institutions that are thinking about PREA, as it's also known, in terms of providing resources to eligible applicants that look at adult prisons and jails, juvenile facilities, community correction facilities, law enforcement lockups, and other temporary holdings, and tribal detention facilities. So just knowing that the eligibility category includes a multitude of correctional or detained type of facilities. Justice reinvestment, reducing violent crime by improving justice system performance. So in fiscal year 2019, this program looks a little different than it has looked in other reiterations. You're still the same of providing funding for tribal, state, and local justice agencies to develop and implement and test innovative and research-based responses, but maybe some of the prioritized areas have differed or look vastly different than it has in previous years. But again, this particular opportunity has already been out on the field and been released in some cases, but we're expecting up to 6 awards with an amount up to $1,250,000, and definitely was a part of the Q2 release program. Also being offered by BJA, upholding the rule of law and preventing wrongful convictions program. This solicitation presents competitive awards to create multidisciplinary teams to assess and address areas of risk for wrongful conviction and to review and assess post-conviction claims of innocence. Applicants would lead collaborative teams of prosecutors, conviction integrity units, and innocence programs to complete the work. In fiscal year 2019, the expectation is that we will make up to 5 awards at amounts up to $250,000 with an expected release of the solicitation occurring in Q2. And in my particular area of expertise, the Second Chance Act Comprehensive Community-Based Adult Reentry Program, which supports community and faith-based organizations in developing and implementing comprehensive and collaborative programs that support people who are reentering communities from incarceration, who are at medium to high risk of reoffending, reduce recidivism, and improve public safety. In fiscal year 2019, we are expecting to make up to 10 awards at $1 million each. Again, this particular solicitation is expected to be released in this quarter, which is the Q2. Also under the realm of Second Chance Act, innovative reentry initiatives, building system capacity, and testing strategies to reduce recidivism. This Innovations in Reentry initiative looks nothing like it has in the past. However, the same eligible applicants are the state, local, and tribal jurisdictions to engage in a 3-part recidivism reduction program: strategic planning, implementation, and evaluation. Applicant jurisdictions will propose to establish or expand a recidivism reduction initiative in line with the Risk Needs Responsivity, or R&R, framework and evidence-based practices. In fiscal year 2019, BJA expects to make up to 9 awards under this solicitation, with the average amount being $1,025,000. Again, this particular solicitation will definitely be out before the end of March. Innovations in supervision. BJA has established this program to seek to improve the capacity and effectiveness of community supervision, parole and probation agencies to increase their capacity for success rates and reduce the number of crimes committed by those who are under the said supervision, which in turn reduces admissions to prisons and jails and definitely is an effort to save costs on taxpayers. BJA expects to make up to 5 awards, averaging up to $900,000, and again, this particular solicitation would be on the street and go live before the end of Q2. Innovative responses to behavior in the community using the swift, certain, and fair model. BJA is issuing this solicitation to work with jurisdictions and agencies interested in developing or enhancing supervision strategies that comport with the swift, certain, and fair principles and implementing them as part of models informed by research and responsive to local circumstances. The swift, certain, fair strategies are designed to improve supervision outcomes which will reduce recidivism and, in turn, improve public safety. In fiscal year 2019, BJA expects to make up to 5 awards, with the average amount of these awards being $600,000. Also under the realm of Second Chance Act, improving reentry for adults with co-occurring substance abuse and mental illness, better known as CSAMI. This particular solicitation aims at improving access to and delivery of services for offenders with co-occurring substance abuse and mental illness when they leave incarceration and to re-enter the community. BJA expects to make up to 10 awards, averaging up to $1 million each, with an expectation that this particular solicitation will be available to the public before the end of March. Justice and Mental Health Collaboration Program supports innovative cross-systems collaboration to improve responses and outcomes for individuals with mental illnesses or co-occurring mental health and substance abuse disorders who come in contact with the justice system. BJA expects to make up to 55 awards under this solicitation. Yes, I said it, 55 awards, with the average amount of $350,000. The expectation is that this JMHCP, or Justice and Mental Health Collaboration Program, will be made available in Q2, so expect it to be out before the end of March. Moving on to COPE, the Comprehensive Opioid Abuse Site-Based Program. The widespread use of opioids has devastated many communities. In response to this epidemic, the Comprehensive Opioid Abuse Site-Based Program is designed to support our nation's first responders and provide for the needs of crime victims, support diversion and alternatives to incarceration programs for nonviolent individuals who come in contact with the justice system as a result of abuse of illicit and prescription opioids. In addition, implement and enhance prescription drug monitoring programs. This funding will also promote cross-system planning and coordination of service delivery. And lastly, reduce the incidence of fatal overdoses associated with opioid use. In fiscal year 2019, BJA expects to make up to 201 awards. The average amount of these awards will be $900,000. The expectation is that the COPE, Comprehensive Opioid Abuse Site-Based Program, will be made available to the public before the end of March 2019. The Adult Drug Court Discretionary Grant Program. The purpose of this particular solicitation is to provide financial and technical assistance to states, state courts, local courts, units of local government, and Indian tribal governments to develop and implement drug courts that effectively integrate evidence-based substance abuse disorder treatment, mandatory drug testing, sanctions and incentives, and transitional services in a judicially supervised court setting with jurisdiction over substance misusers to include addressing the opioid epidemic. In fiscal year 2019, BJA expects to make 170 awards under the Adult Drug Court Discretionary Grant Program, with the average amount up to $500,000. Please expect this solicitation to also be available in quarter 2. Last on this list as it pertains to grant funds or grant solicitations, we have the Coordinated Tribal Assistance Solicitation, which provides comprehensive training and technical assistance to tribes in the areas of alcohol and substance abuse-related crime, tribal courts, tribal justice systems, Alaska Native justice systems, addressing violent crime, and supporting prosecutors in tribal communities. In fiscal year 2019, BJA expects to make up to 5 awards, with the average amount at $750,000 for each award. And now we're going to go into questions. Mary Jo?
Hi, thank you, everyone. We will start the question session here very shortly. A couple things. I know some people tend to join a little later, so you might have missed this in the beginning. Due to the weather situation here in D.C., we will be closing the offices early. Therefore, the webinar will end at approximately 2:45. So we're sorry for that inconvenience. If any of your questions are not answered between now and the end of the webinar, please notify and email the National Criminal Justice Reference Service. I am going to move the slides, and there'll be information on how to contact them. Also, before we start all the questions, I'm seeing a lot coming through about the webinar and the recording and PowerPoints. The webinar recording for today, the PowerPoint slides, and a transcript will all be posted to the Bureau of Justice Assistance website. It's going to take approximately 10 business days to do that, and we will also send you an email notifying you when that has been done. So you'll be sure you won't miss it. We're going to do the same thing for all the upcoming webinars. So somebody had mentioned that they can attend 2 of them. If you register, you will receive an email when those items have been posted. So you won't miss out either. All right, so we're going to go ahead and we're going to talk a little bit about the resources that are available.
Okay, good afternoon. This is Janelle Salusi, and I'm just going to go ahead and kind of quickly review some of the resources that we felt were important enough to share with prospective applicants in regards to how you can utilize what is available to you now as you prepare for these solicitations that we've discussed today that will be forthcoming. So one of the, obviously, one of the best resources for you as being interested in BJA funding would be the BJA website. We will also go over the OJP Grant Applicant Resource Guide. This is a new resource for 2019 that the Office of Justice Programs has compiled and made available on the OJP Funding Resource website. The program plan initiatives includes information in regards to forthcoming programs and solicitations and opportunities across all agencies within OJP. So this would also be a great resource for applicants that are on the phone now that would like to learn a little bit more about what will be forthcoming from the Office for Victims of Crime, the National Institute of Justice, BJS, the Bureau of Justice Statistics, as well as the SMART office. Moving forward, the second slide here of resources can guide you towards grants.gov. If you're not familiar with this resource, there is a portal and a learning center that's available to applicants that you can access now to familiarize yourself with how to utilize Workspace, how to become registered, and to sign up to receive notifications about funding opportunities from the federal government. The National Criminal Justice Reference Service, within our website, which we do have a hyperlink here in the presentation, includes a list of all current OJP funding opportunities. You have the ability to subscribe to email notifications so that you can receive weekly notices through our funding newsletter about forthcoming opportunities, as well as new resources, webinars, and FAQs that become available from the agencies that will help support you in developing your solicitations. NIJ's Crime Solution website, crimesolution.gov, is a web-based clearinghouse of programs and practices that have been rated in terms of their effectiveness in addressing different criminal justice issues. This website could be reviewed and used to find programs that have been rated as being promising so that you can help shape and develop not only your own application, but perhaps reach out to potential collaborators, research partners, or other organizations to become subrecipients on your proposals. With that, we will go ahead and open up the Q&A session of the webinar.
Hi, so our first question, if our state has signed onto 1373 or the Sanctuary City state legislation, will the communities covered by it be ineligible for these funds? So assuming that you mean all funds, or if you have a particular fund, then send a follow-up, but we're going to answer it with the idea that you mean all funds.
So we are waiting on further direction. We haven't been definitively told one way or another at BJA. However, I would encourage you to look at the eligibility requirements that are listed in each individual solicitation, and also things that would be mandatory listed within the checklist of each solicitation. Some may include compliance with the federal regulations on immigration. So I would just tell you that you should look at the individual solicitations, and if there's any further direction given to BJA on that issue, we will certainly be communicating it out to the field.
Next question. I work as a reentry coordinator for an authority attached to the Department of Corrections for the state of Georgia. Would funding grants be available for training of offenders to increase successful reentry into society?
There is always the amounts of funding available for the offenders who are returning to their communities. Amongst the ones that were listed in today's webinar, the Second Chance Act Comprehensive Community Adult-Based Reentry focuses directly to the nonprofit providers that assist corrections with offenders and their transition back to society. However, on the other initiatives dealing with corrections and reentry, where the state, local, or tribal governments have to be the lead applicant, a nonprofit provider could be a subcontractor to the particular lead applicant.
And just to piggyback on that, I mean, looking at this issue creatively, we have had under the Innovative Prosecution Solution Grant prosecutors' offices that have applied to collaborate with local workforce development agencies to provide them mitigating sentences or defer their sentence pending that they get a trade or a job opportunity. So that's something that you could also talk to your local prosecutors or other partners within your criminal justice arena to holistically try and address and find other opportunities to look and address that issue to get offenders resources.
Yeah.
Someone asked when the presenter says release date, if they mean that the grants will appear on grants.gov for the release date, and that is correct.
That is correct.
When the opportunity is released, it will also appear on grants.gov. Do these expected release dates take into account delays, if any, due to the shutdown? And if there are additional shutdowns, will that delay these timelines any further?
So the timelines that we listed in this particular PowerPoint were based on our FY19 Department of Justice program plan. And obviously, yes, all of these have now been delayed, but we wanted to maintain the dates within the PowerPoint just so you have a realistic view of which ones to expect first. So the ones that list first quarter, you can look to be out to the field sooner than later, and then followed by the second quarter ones and then the third quarter. if that makes sense. But yes, they have all been delayed, but we're hoping now that we're reopened, we can get some out the door. But yes, if we are further delayed, it will, or if there's another shutdown, they could be further delayed.
For the reentry grant, building system capacity and testing strategies to reduce recidivism. If your community has already done the planning stage, can you still apply for funding for implementation and evaluation?
Yes, there is a three-prong piece that involves this particular solicitation. However, if you already have an existing program, then you would apply for that program to be structured into A, implementation, and B, evaluation.
Andre, you might know how to answer this question. How can I tag a particular slide? Do you know?
Tag?
Yeah. We're not really sure what you're referring to in that question. If you have some more information or details that you can provide, that would be great. If you're asking to tag things in the WebEx platform, I don't believe you'll be able to do that. And again, we will post the PowerPoints. It will be a PDF version of the PowerPoints, and that will be posted to the BJA website at a later date. Would an authority, which is part of the state agency, be eligible for the second chance grant application process?
If you are, well, let's talk about specifically which particular program. For the community-based program, that is geared towards nonprofit providers. However, if you're talking about innovations in reentry, if you're talking about the actual Second Chance Act for co-occurring disorders for substance abuse and mental health, yes, there are separate categories for state agencies to actually apply. The state agency does not have to be the Department of Correction, but it does in fact have to be a state agency.
Somebody's asking a question about a contact being provided for a specific grant opportunity. When the grant opportunities are released, the contact information will be listed in the solicitation, and you'll be directed to contact the National Criminal Justice Reference Service with any questions that you may have about that opportunity.
But they reach out to the grant manager on any particular solicitation if they're unable to answer the question directly, and they interview us prior to the solicitation being released to the field and anticipating questions so we can answer them in advance so they have them on the ready for you all. But they're very responsive, and they do work hand in glove with us to get the correct information out to the field.
A couple individuals indicated that the slides, the presentation froze on their end and they were not able to see the slides, and I am sorry that you experienced that issue. Again, the slides will be posted along with the recording, so you can actually sit and listen to the entire recording. From our end, it looks like everything recorded correctly. If we go back and we look at it and there are any problems, we will make sure that we insert the correct slides at that time. Would the JMHCP grant be appropriate for a, give me 1 second, you're cut off, for a co-occurring drug court program?
Well, I'm uncertain at this point. I can't really identify which of the following programs would you be eligible. But if you're talking about a drug court program, then perhaps the drug court solicitation would speak to that initiative. If it's a substance use or substance misuse or co-occurring actual program, then that would probably be either the Second Chance Act for co-occurring disorders and substance abuse. However, if you're a law enforcement agency and you're coming at it from an angle of prevention, then perhaps it looks more like justice mental health collaboration.
Are these grants reimbursement grants? Are they multi-year grants? Is there a match required?
Well, I want to speak to that. I think that when you start to read the solicitation, you have to look at the mandates of the solicitation and what is identified. Some solicitations are by statute required to have a match requirement. However, there is the option to apply for what is known as a match waiver. So it depends on the particular solicitation whether or not a match would be required by the applicant.
And also the duration of the grant varies based on the solicitation, but that information is all embedded within the solicitation. The majority of are multi-year grants, so.
Will the Second Chance Act comprehensive community-based adult reentry program solicitation include any sort of research and evaluation component?
At this point, Second Chance Act always, many of the solicitations identified in the Second Chance Act do require you to have an independent evaluator. That is, you're supposed to budget for that, and so the federal funds provided through the Second Chance Act can support the establishment of an evaluation.
Another question about the Second Chance Act Adult Reentry Program: will it be open to community-based organizations and not units of government, local and government agencies?
So for the community-based
organizations that are not units of government or local government.
That's who the eligible applicants are. For the Second Chance Act community-based adult reentry, that is particularly geared towards nonprofit organizations only. It does not involve governmental organizations. They should be partners with you, but they're not the lead applicants on that particular solicitation.
How can I sign up for notifications of funding opportunities when they are released? Janelle, would you like to answer that one?
Sure, absolutely. You can certainly sign up on the BJA.gov website. You can sign up to receive their newsletter from that page. You may also subscribe through grants.gov. And then the National Criminal Justice Reference Service has two different newsletters that are available for subscription, and you can certainly register to receive those. One is the funding newsletter, and that newsletter is sent out weekly during the funding season, and typically on Fridays. The website for NCJRS, the National Criminal Justice Reference Service, is www.ncjrs.gov.
Would an existing drug court be eligible for the last grant Andre spoke of, or is that funding for startups? For instance, existing DTC that once needs to expand but doesn't have the funds to support that currently?
According to the Adult Drug Court Discretionary Grant Program, it's to provide financial and technical assistance to state courts, local courts, units of local government, and Indian and tribal governments to develop and implement drug courts that effectively integrate evidence-based substance abuse disorder treatments. To that end, I would think that you would have to look at the full eligibility characteristics identified in the specific solicitation as to whether or not your particular program would be eligible for funding.
Can you speak to how often legal aid services, such as expungement, are specifically referred to in reentry grants?
Certainly. I believe that each jurisdiction would have to develop a set of stakeholders that are vested in the community's effort to tackle reentry and to reduce recidivism. So it is up to all of the parties interested to be a part of the application, to subcontract, or to be a part of how the structure of the grant begins to develop. And so to that end, if expungement is a part of something that that particular community is building an effort for, then that particular agency would be a part of that discussion or work with other lead community-based organizations to ensure that that is inserted into the effort.
Is all the funding appropriated for FY19, and is there any risk of funding cuts to support other priorities? Are the solicitations already prepared and ready to be released for those listed for Q1?
They have been prepared, but as I noted in the beginning of this webinar, everything is certainly subject to change. So until it is released, this is really just a preview of what we intend to put out to the field, but there are absolutely no guarantees at this time. But once they are out, they are out and will be funded.
Are juvenile justice departments eligible for adult reentry funds for those youth who are released after age 18?
If you're referring to youth that are released after age 18 and the individual is returning to the community and a particular applicant receives Second Chance Act funding, then, of course, that particular agency should reach out for the individual or to assist the offender who is age 18 and older.
Will the Second Chance Act comprehensive community-based adult reentry program be open only to community-based organizations? This is the same question we had earlier.
Okay, no problem.
I think it's a different person, but for reentry programs in the community that assist returning citizens. I think there's part of the question is missing.
Okay.
I believe they're trying to say we are a reentry program in the community that assists returning citizens. Do we qualify?
If you are, in fact, a 501c3 nonprofit organization, you do qualify. We have, as established last year and hopefully for this year, Category 1 for nonprofit organizations that are working with a larger or urban jurisdiction or working with a large population. And we have Category 2 that is identified in the solicitation for the rural population or rural communities as well as smaller agencies.
If we currently have one of these grants, are we eligible to apply when a new solicitation is released?
You are eligible to apply for as many grants as necessary if you feel like you're eligible. If you meet the eligibility requirements, we don't, it hasn't been known for a particular organization to receive more than one Second Chance Act grant. Yes, that has happened.
I assume all opportunities will be listed in the search grants option under grants.gov. Is that correct?
That is correct.
When they are released.
When they're
released.
Yeah, when they're released.
Would a county agency be able to apply for a Second Chance grant?
Yes. For the grants, Innovations in Reentry, as well as Innovations in Supervision, they are actually categorized under state, local, and then tribal. So the actual county would fall into the local jurisdiction category.
Can a local government apply directly to BJA for the burn JAG funds if we are allocated local jurisdiction funding and also apply through the state, thereby submitting 2 applications?
No, all of that is formula-based funding that goes to the state, and it is administered directly from your state administering agency. So again, I would recommend that you take a look at that link and determine who that is, because that's who you would apply for that particular funding stream.
I'm going to interrupt for one quick second here. If you're submitting questions through the chat feature, please resubmit them through the Q&A feature. We would appreciate it. It makes it easier for us to see the questions and then to respond to them and acknowledge that we've answered them. We have a question here. Are there any faith-based grants through OJJP? I assume that they're saying OJJDP or OJP. I'm not sure. But
in this case of OJJDP, we were looking at the Bureau of Justice Assistance. However, if you're talking about the larger OJP, I think you would have to check the eligibility requirements identified. Based on all that we covered, under the program piece, so I think you have to look at the eligibility on that one.
Would any of the funding opportunities fund a potential veterans court?
Yes. Under the drug court, the adult drug court, I want to stress adult, because they do have a juvenile one. Adult Drug Court Discretionary Grant Program would definitely be supportive to stand up that particular initiative.
That's something else that if you're creative, you could also, I mean, it may not, obviously fund all of the components of a veteran court, but the Innovative Prosecution Solutions Grant could fund a prosecutor that could be designated to a particular court to represent those cases. And then, you could look at some of the other reentry. You could incorporate into that issue as well to supply social workers to help individuals find jobs. So I think there are a couple different grants that you could look at to develop that model, but we don't have one that specifically just is for implementation of a veterans court, but I think there are ways you could be creative and obtain the pieces to create a veteran court through a number of the different solicitations and opportunities.
Of the grants available, which might be best utilized for a halfway house focusing on reentry offenders coming out of the prison system?
In many cases, the Second Chance Act community-based adult reentry program seems like a great fit. However, I will say that if the halfway house is being operated by the county government or by the state through a contract to a nonprofit provider, the actual local government or state government that is the lead could in fact apply for funding to that particular program, to that particular halfway house, even if the subcontractor operates it on the side. So again, to Tammy's point, identified, I think we have to start to think creatively. And so in this remaining time, it would be great to have some of those creative questions that you think about across different funding streams identified here today.
Is there any way to find out the COPE categories in advance? They have changed the last 2 years, and last year there were only 2 weeks to apply due to delays.
No, unfortunately, we're not able to give that out until the solicitation is released. I do believe, I know there was delays last year, but I thought that it got extended, and we try and take into consideration when under those circumstances. So, we certainly, I would encourage you to sign up so you know the day it's released and you have as much opportunity and warning as possible.
And just want to encourage everyone that under the COPE initiative, that's the Comprehensive Opioid Abuse Site-Based Program, BJA expects to make 201 awards.
Are the anticipated award amounts listed the expected annual? Are the anticipated award amounts listed the expected annual award amounts, or are they the overall anticipated award amount covered over several years for multi-year grants?
The latter.
Would law enforcement agencies be eligible for the JMHCP?
Absolutely. Yes, we encourage all law enforcement agencies, state as well as local, to apply.
Will the JAG grant be open to community-based nonprofits, or is that specifically geared towards government organizations?
That is specifically geared towards state government organizations, state and local government organizations.
Is there any funding available in 2019 for cold case homicide investigation task force implementation?
So I would encourage you to look at the Innovative Policing Solutions Grant for that type of project.
Are superior courts and district courts in the same county able to apply for the same grant separately, or are they required to apply together?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that one?
Sure. Are superior courts and district courts in the same county able to apply for the same grant separately, or are they required to apply together?
Yes, you would need to refer to the eligibility statement within the solicitation to make that determination, and they would need to be two separate, unique proposals and responses to the solicitation requirements.
Is there any funding opportunity that could support crime analysis, building on BJA's past investments in this area?
Again, that would be another great grant opportunity, either to apply through the Innovative Policing Solutions Grant or if you're looking for your prosecutor's offices to develop analytic capability, I would also encourage you to look at the Innovative Prosecution Solutions Grant. Analytics is a part of the CJIC model. Certainly once there is a hit, so if you were trying to implement an overall crime gun intelligence center within your department, that could be a component of it that would be funded within that grant as well.
Would a law enforcement agency be eligible for the JMHCP?
Yes, and we definitely encourage you to apply.
For startup organizations that do not have funding and the grant asks for 50% funding, is there an opportunity for startup organizations, or is there a special clause for startup funding? For startup organizations that do not have funding and the grant asks for 50% funding, is there opportunity for startup organizations, or is there a special clause for startup funding?
So if you're referring to a match waiver, then in fact you as the organization could apply for a match waiver if in fact the solicitation requested you to have a match.
Does the Superior Court of California fall under county?
If you're referring to, you would know where you stand in terms of being an agency. It's not determined on this end. So if it's a part of it depends on what the solicitation is, what the eligibility criteria, and what in fact you hope to do with the funds should you be awarded them.
If you're a local government entity, then yes.
Are DWI courts eligible for the Edward Byrne Memorial Grant, or would another grant be better suited for treatment and supervision?
So again, that's the pot of money that is administered through your state administrating agency. So they really outline the priorities, but it is something that we would consider as an eligible category. You could also, again, look at the Innovative Policing Solutions Grant if you were looking to do some kind of special initiative that addresses DUIs as an issue.
Will the Technology Innovation for Public Safety Grant be released in 2019, or has it been moved to the COPS office?
I believe it's been moved to the COPS office. It is not with BJA, or it's not been included in our program plan.
Will there be a joint BJA SAMHSA drug court grant this year?
Well, we went through all of the programs that we anticipate in fiscal year 19. Accordingly, one hasn't been listed as a SAMHSA collaboration. Uncertain if SAMHSA would be putting out something. We can't speak for them. But on this end, we identified all of the grant programs for fiscal year 19.
Will body-worn, sorry. Did you want to speak to?
No, I mean, I was just going to say, just for clarification, so what Andre and I covered today is what we anticipate being put out to the field through BJA for this fiscal year. Again, it is subject to change, but if you did not hear it today, then more than likely it will not be funded through BJA.
And again, we would also encourage you to visit the DOJ program plan online, and you can access that through the OJP Funding Resource Center website, which is ojp.gov/funding. And under the blue Explore button there, you can select the DOJ program plan. And that'll have a list of all the programs and solicitations that will be offered for each one of the agencies, including BJA.
Will body-worn camera have a minimum number of camera systems?
It is based on, the way that these are awarded is that it's based on the size of your department, the amount of money you'll get, but the camera amount is limited to $2,000 per camera. So you could buy, I mean, depending on the size of your jurisdiction, we're not limiting the number of cameras, but we are limiting the amount of money you can spend on cameras, and then the amount of money you get based on the size of your agency.
Are violent offenders, current offense, and prior offenses still prohibited from receiving sources from BJA grants?
I've never known them to have been prohibited. I think it's based on the solicitation. Each solicitation identifies whether or not there'll be nonviolent offenders or whether or not it'd be to assist violent offenders. We, on the reentry side, look at medium to high risk based on a risk assessment. But if you're looking for category and what ultimately is determined and defined as whether violent or nonviolent, I think you have to look to the specific solicitation to see the mandates of that solicitation and who are the, what are the target population.
Last year, the priority for drug court grants was those addressing opioid crisis. Is this still the same for 2019?
We haven't identified any of the priority considerations for any of the solicitations that were identified in today's webinar. We ask that you wait for the solicitation to be released, and those priority considerations for each respective solicitation will be identified.
Could any of these grants be used to fund educational and vocational opportunities for individuals who are criminal justice involved?
I believe if you're a nonprofit organization and part of your transitional assistance involves vocational and technical education, then that could be covered under the Second Chance Adult Community-Based Organization program.
Give me 1 second. I can't see all the questions. Will you be sharing information on TTA grants that will be available in this fiscal year?
So that wasn't part of the or information in this particular webinar, but I mean, we certainly can look at supplying that in the future, and it is definitely posted on our website. So I would encourage you to look at TTA opportunities on our website.
1 second, I'm trying to respond to another question. What are the best opportunities for a 501c3 nonprofit to support juvenile justice-involved veterans?
I mean, I think similar to the response we gave for the Veterans Court and any of the reentry opportunities that could incorporate the social aspect of helping those individuals.
Did you say earlier that it is or is not possible for a nonprofit to receive more than one round of funding under the Second Chance Community Adult Reentry Program?
I said that you can apply for funding. I said that there have been nonprofits that have received more than one Second Chance Act grant, whether for adult or juvenile, from BJA or OJJDP.
How closely does OJP work with other federal agencies on reentry initiatives, Department of Labor, SAMHSA, Education? Tips for people to look at other sources of funding.
I think that you have to look at their respective agencies and what they're requiring. While it can all be considered reentry, in many cases, the performance metric and the driver could look very different. At Labor, they're looking at employment. In the Department of Education, they've been looking at attainment and certificate and vocational attainment. And just looks very different even under SAMHSA. So I can only speak for the BJA solicitations that we have identified in today's webinar.
Will there be a Second Chance conference offered to those awarded?
Well, now, should you be awarded a Second Chance Act grant, I believe that there's always, you have to budget for some training. Whether or not there'll be a conference hasn't been determined, but there are always going to be trainings, whether webinar or in person.
Does the swift, certain, and fair modeling supervision response provide for new probation case management systems?
If you were looking at the swift, certain, and fair, that's a particular model. If you're looking at case management systems, you might want to consider innovations in supervision or even innovations in reentry.
Will there be an implementation and expansion grants for adult drug court discretionary programs?
We only spoke about the one solicitation for adult drug court discretionary program.
Trying to see the rest of this. Can we apply for multiple funding opportunities such as comprehensive opioid abuse site-based programs and adult drug court funding? We are currently operating as a adult drug court.
Yes.
Yes.
You can always apply for more than one grant.
We encourage you to be creative around your within your respective jurisdictions, and try to look through the solicitations that will cover many of the issues that your communities may be facing.
Will there be drug court-based funding opportunities allow for funding to address housing issues? Will the drug?
We have not identified what the priority considerations would be inside of the adult drug court discretionary grant program. It seems highly unlikely that housing would be one of those particular priority considerations identified. However, if your community is experiencing some of the housing issues as it relates to individuals who are facing substance abuse and mental health disorders, perhaps you could look at the Second Chance Act co-occurring substance abuse and mental illness, or maybe there's a nonprofit agency that stands ready to apply for the Second Chance Act adult community-based reentry program.
Are there any grants we could access to help in developing our integrated CBI into education and employment programming initiatives?
Certainly. I think that if you get around the table of your stakeholders within your jurisdiction, you might want to look at innovations in reentry. You can look at innovations in supervision, and if there's a nonprofit that stands ready to deliver that cognitive behavioral therapy, then you could look at Second Chance Act adult community-based comprehensive reentry.
Would any of these opportunities work for a 501c3 nonprofit to support juvenile crime prevention?
We are only speaking about the Bureau of Justice Assistance, which is geared towards helping adults.
Yeah, as I indicated earlier, I would refer you to the Department of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency for those grant opportunities, because we have a whole separate bureau set aside to address those and provide funding for juveniles. Traditionally, we do not fund those.
Somebody was asking, they hoped that it wasn't addressed earlier, and the question was related to the cold case, anything available in 2019 for cold case homicide investigations or task force, and that was addressed earlier.
It was, but I'll repeat it. Your best opportunity to apply for funding to address cold cases would be through the Innovative Policing Solutions. Can national nonprofit intermediary organizations apply for Second Chance Reentry Program? Our affiliate organization would implement the program locally.
I think that if you establish yourself as a nonprofit and you identified a target population within the community and meet all the other mandates that are necessary for assisting offenders as they transition from prison or jail back into the community, then that sets the bar as you being a potential eligible applicant for the funding.
For the one adult drug court grant discussed, will that be available to jurisdictions who intend to use the grant to fund a new court, not an existing drug court?
According to the solicitation as it stands, it's to develop and implement drug courts that effectively integrate evidence-based substance abuse disorder treatment, mandatory drug testing, sanctions and incentives, and transitional services in a judicially supervised court setting with jurisdiction over substance misusers, to include addressing the opioid epidemic.
So neither Andre or I manage that particular grant, but what we can do is ask the individual, our counterpart who does, and get back to you via email if you want to provide your email address. we'll take it down. They're able to type that in.
I'm sorry?
They could just type their emails to you.
Yeah, so the person that asked that question, if you could go ahead and send us your email.
We're not sure if you'd be eligible to do an expansion, which I assume is your question.
The CA policies on non-cooperation of federal immigration enforcement prohibit the ability to meet grant requirements.
So again, it's going to be case-by-case per solicitation, whether they include that as a requirement or not. Some will, some will not. So you'll just need to look at the eligibility within the particular grant that you're interested in.
Thank you. We received your email as well. And it looks like we've actually answered. Oops, we got another one. Do you have any recommendation for grants to focus on that allow funds for civil legal needs of people with criminal records and or substance abuse disorders, like expungement, driver, occupational training issues, children's needs, access to benefits? I think you touched on this one earlier, or something similar.
I think that if you're a nonprofit organization, then that could easily be covered under the Second Chance Act Comprehensive Adult Community-Based Program. And if you're assisting a state, local, or tribal government, then some of that could easily be incorporated into the improving reentry for adults with co-occurring substance abuse and mental illness.
And at this moment, that is our last question. Another one just popped up. Would you mind showing the Second Chance Reentry Program slide again for a moment? My apologies. There you go.
No, and again, all of these slides will be made available after the webinar, so you'll be able to access them as a PDF.
Many law enforcement agencies are looking for equipment and technology. Best advice on grant options other than JAG funds, radios, license plate readers, RMS systems are what they're looking to fund.
So I would encourage you to be creative and think of innovative projects that you would incorporate that equipment to use. So whether that is, improving your investigative techniques or doing targeted enforcement, and look at the Innovative Policing Solutions Grant. And or the CJAG grant if you're interested in developing a crime gun intelligence center. I mean, certainly license plate readers and all of those things help aid in investigation once you have leads and hits. So they could be costs that could be incorporated in the investigative side of the CJAG.
A question came through privately to the host. Could you let me know as well if the adult drug, okay, so they just want us to let them know via email if the adult drug court grant would be intended for new courts. So we got a couple more email addresses.
Yep. Okay. So, yeah, we will clarify whether that's for new courts as well as expansion to drug courts.
The Second Chance Act Reentry Program, where do you find this? I'm not sure what you would mean by this. Information on that?
The solicitation hasn't been released, but if you're referring...
They're referring to the Act. Is that the question?
I'm not sure. It just says Second Chance Act Reentry Program. Where do I find this? So if can you clarify if you're looking for information on the Act itself, and if so, can you put that into the Q&A tab?
If you're looking for the solicitation, it hasn't been released yet, and it's slated for our second quarter. So once we get our first quarter grants out, it'll be on that next cycle. So more than likely the end of February, beginning of March. If you're looking generally for information about the Act itself, do we have a link to that on our website?
We have a link to the First Step Act. The Second Chance Act has just been reauthorized under the First Step Act that was signed by President Trump earlier this year.
And so the BJA website is bja.gov. Are there any grants to purchase vehicles or update command unit vehicles?
So traditionally, we do not fund vehicles. The only time I've seen a vehicle funded is we were able to make a case to build out vans specifically for evidence collection to help improve efficiencies in getting ballistics and trying to comply under the Crime Gun Intelligence Center piece. But beyond that, just for, everyday law enforcement use, we traditionally do not fund vehicles.
If your agency has a current JMHCP grant with potential for asking for a no-cost extension, is it still okay to apply for another grant, another JMHCP grant, since the time frames will overlap without knowing if either will be accepted?
So BJA is not giving extensions unless you meet the letter of the law under the statute, which is very difficult. It's primarily limited to if you had a law change or some kind of, major catastrophe that caused an interference. The government shutdown is not a reason or rationale that we can use to grant extensions. I know that we were very liberal under this policy previously, but that has shifted under this administration. So if you do not expend your current funds under that particular grant and you end up applying for another one, you're still welcome to apply. However, that is something that we would take into consideration in making that decision.
The Stop School Violence, is the eligible applicant local government or the school?
It will depend on the solicitation. There was certainly a lot of questions in regards to eligibility last year, and some clarification will be forthcoming in this year's opportunities. So again, we would just encourage you, once that solicitation does become available, to review the solicitation and make a determination on whether or not you meet the eligibility criteria.
Somebody asked, I gotta see if I can see the question fully. Will the answers to the questions, not just the slides, be available after this? Will the entire recording be available? So yes, it will be the recording, and we will have a transcript. So you can just flip through the transcript to the Q&A portion if you don't want to listen to the entire recording. But both those items, as well as the PowerPoint itself individually, will be posted. And again, it'll take approximately 10 business days, but we will email you and let you know once that has been posted. Are there grants to fund drug testing labs?
Well, within the Crime Gun Intelligence Center grant, we do, the lab piece is a huge portion of it, particularly if you're processing your casing ballistics there, so we would fund techs in that scenario. I don't know of any other that we specifically fund for drug testing. Do you? If you had it could be incorporated. I could see it in an innovative or supervision grant if it was part of your strategy for parole and probation. And they were to partner with you, and you would be a subcontractor under them to achieve better results in expediting drug testing. I'm not sure if that's the route you're looking for, but
we'll take any other questions that you may have. If you're looking to see a particular slide, we will send those slides out, so you will be able to view it at that time. And actually, one of the slides that I would like to have up and leave up for a little while are the resources. So if you want to jot down those URLs, you can do so. But I'll flip through these last two slides and keep them up for a little while. It does appear at this time all questions have been answered. We will give you another minute or two to see if you come up with anything, and if not, we will end the webinar. It is 2:35, and we do need to end at 2:45, so We have a few more minutes.
And again, we just want to thank you for participating and your interest in BJA, and we hope that you found this helpful.
Thank you, and we definitely look forward to reading your proposals. We wish you all the best in terms of thinking creatively as you look to solve many of the issues within your criminal justice spectrum on the local level.
One other question that came through. Under the opioid grant, would drug testing equipment in the field be eligible for local agencies?
I believe under some creativity through the COPE program, the Comprehensive Opioid Site-Based Program, definitely would speak to that.
Was that the answer to the question about sharing? No. We will share the recording. The recording of the webinar will be posted to the BJA website in approximately 10 business days. We will notify you once it has been posted, but you can also visit the website periodically if you like. Will contact information be made available to those who were presenters on this webinar?
I think out of fairness, we want to make sure that each and every question goes through NCJRS. Your question may seem like just your question, but it could be a part of a larger question that could speak to some of the issues faced by other jurisdictions. So as much as we try to promote fairness, we would like to have NCJRS be the actual host for all questions pertaining to all the solicitations.
One of the things I would like to do, since we have maybe another few seconds, is I would like to share again the information about the upcoming webinars. So we have 3 more webinars coming up. One will be this Thursday, the 31st at 1 p.m. The first steps to applying, prepare now. So we're going to give you an overview of what you need to do so that you're prepared when these solicitations become available. The federal funding process, what new and seasoned applicants should consider. That one will be held on February 5th at 1 p.m. And submitting your application, avoid these common mistakes. February 7th at 1 p.m. and Andre will be back here on that day to speak with us again.
Yeah.
All of those you can find the registration links on the BJA website under the funding section. The URL is shown right here. It's www.bja.gov/funding/webinars.html. And again, if you register for those webinars but you're not able to attend, you will still be notified once the artifacts are posted, so the recording and whatnot. So even if you can't attend, go ahead and register so that you don't miss out. And at this time, we absolutely have no other questions, so we are going to end this webinar. We thank you very much for your time. On behalf of BJA, and go ahead.
Yep, thank you all, and we look forward to your solicitations, and I encourage you to take advantage of the series of webinars that have been articulated and utilize the resources online, and always feel free to ask questions and call the services that are available. If they can't answer it, they will reach out to us directly, and at that time we'd be happy to be in direct contact.
All right, thank you so much.